Okay. So,
Meyer, can you pass the wasabi beans? Sorry, Rabbi.
okay, today's Parashat Yitro, really a crucial and vital fundamental in Judaism. The parasha which the Jewish people finally accept the Torah. They stand, 3 million people approximately stand at the foot of the mountain and receive the Torah for the very reason why they were taken out of Egypt. And they get to the greatest revelation which ever happened. And God himself reveals himself, whatever fashion, format it was, but God reveals himself to the Jewish people. And we all know what happened at Matan Torah. God tells them the 10 Commandments, gives them the 10 Commandments, which is ultimately, Sadia Gaon says famously, that in the 10 Commandments are included the entire Torah. So we're not going to really discuss today what's the connection between the beginning of the parasha, Parashat Yitro. Jethro comes, the father-in-law of Moshe Rabbeinu. Last year we discussed the background, what period this actually took place, famous machloket, famous argument between Rashi and Ramban, whether it took place before Matan Torah, after Matan Torah, all part of the famous machloket which we mentioned many a time in this series of whether the Torah is given in chronological order or not. But that's a separate discussion. Where this kind of connection of Yitro coming in to this whole story of Matan Torah and the whole judicial system which he wants to set up, the advice he gives his son-in-law, it really requires its own shiur. What I want to focus today is on the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 Commandments. And we all know the 10 Commandments, hopefully. I really want to focus on one of the specific commandments. So just very quickly, in terms of breakdown of the 10 Commandments, I just want to take a moment to familiarize ourselves, familiarize ourselves with the breakdown. And maybe I'll just put it up on the screen in 1 second. So the 10 Commandments, we know there were 2 sets of 5 commandments each. 5 commandments on one tablet, the other 5 on the other tablet. And let's see if this will actually come up. Yeah, it looks like it will. Okay, so here we go. I'm just going to share my screen. So you have the 10 Commandments over here. You've got tablet 1, tablet 2. Tablet 1, Anochi Adonai Elohecha, asher tzatzicha mitzrayim, I am the Lord your God. Second commandment, you shall have no other God. Don't bow down to idol worship. Third commandment, do not take God's name in vain. Number 4, observe Shabbat. Number 5, honor your father and mother. Tablet number 2, do not kill. Number 6, number 7, do not commit adultery. Number 8, do not steal, specifically regarding kidnapping. Stealing in general is a separate commandment. Number 9, do not bear false witness. And number 10, do not desire others' possessions. There are many theories, many explanations, many discussions about the connection of the breakdown of the 10 Commandments. There's a beautiful Kli Yakar, which talks about the correlation between the first 5 and the second 5, that they both sides actually correlate to each other. So I am the Lord your God, do not kill. You shall have no other gods, do not commit adultery. And it basically, he goes through the whole breakdown of why each one's connected and why it was specifically given in that format. But there's one out of all these commandments, maybe I should just mention, I always mention this, it's just a fascinating idea. as we know, there's tablet 1, tablet 2. Tablet 1 is the commandments between man and God. Tablet 2, the commandments between man and man. If you look at the basic breakdown of the psukim, there's something fascinating, just a simplistic understanding. If you were a graphic designer, I have a slight connection over here because of my wife, but anybody who's ever done any Word document will tell you there's something strange going on over here, something interesting, which is worthwhile observing. If you look at the psukim in tablet 1, there's many psukim. Anochi Adonai Elohecha asher tzaticha mitzrayim lo yelecha lo tzalcha pesach l'chol tmuna shel shamayim mitach la'aretz, so on and so forth. And then you got lo shtach lahem lo tov lahem. You got loads of kaved avicha v'imcha malchut amecha Shemot Shabbat kadsho asher divra Adonai Elohecha asher shem tavot Adonai Elohecha v'as kol melachtecha, so on and so forth. Lots and lots of words. You've got tablet 2. Do not kill is lo tirtzach, lo tinaf, lo tigno, lo tachmod, lo tamei recha chav, lo tachmod eshrech. 2 words, pretty much singular sentences. And if you just look in terms of the tablets, it seems to be a little bit strange. On one side, you got so much text, and the other side, you got so little text. So in terms of formatting the text, if you've ever put a document together, it's a little bit difficult how exactly it was formatted to understand what did it actually look like. Mabit, about 500 years ago, says something fascinating. He says, in fact, the many wording which there was on one side, on tablet number 1, was actually a much larger font, if you will, a much bigger font. Let's say you take a font size 50 for argument's sake. For this writing, you want nice big tablets. And then do not kill, do not commit adultery, and so on and so forth, was a much smaller, even bigger font. So it's like a font size 150. Why? Says the Mabit something fascinating. Because the difference between tablet 1 and tablet 2 was a bit like, a cornflakes box. Back of cornflakes box, big cornflakes, and back in the days you offer all sorts of offers. You're going to win a free whatever it is. And in the little writing, very small writing, you need kind of a magnifying glass to figure it out. Subject, terms and conditions, whatever it is. All the stuff I don't want you to see. If you buy 15 boxes of the catalogs, then you're going to get a free whatever. So the bottom line is, when you're talking about marketing, the stuff which the marketer wants you to see first, they're going to put in big writing. The little writing is the less significant part, or maybe even the part which they don't want you to pay so much attention to. When God gives the 2 tablets, he takes tablet 1, which is between man and God, and he puts that in small font size. Tablet 2, lo titzach, lo tinaf, lo tachmod, that's in huge size. Why? It's because when he's showing it to the Jewish people, he wants to know, do you want to know what's important? If you want to know what's more important for me, says God, ben adam lachavero, the mitzvot, the commandments between man and man, are more important to God than the commandments between man and God. Not to say that the commandments between man and God are not important, but if you want to know which one is the emphasis, God kind of puts out the tablet 2 rather than tablet 1, as in big text, as opposed to tablet 1, which is smaller. So just in terms of the breakdown of the writing, of the understanding, I want to kind of take a few moments to discuss one of the Aseret HaDibrot. Today, we want to see if we can actually tackle the Isur of the Lo Taseh, the negative commandment of the final one of all the commandments, which is Lo Tachmod, do not covet. I'm going to pull up my screen. Go. Okay, here we go. Okay, so we have over here a very interesting commandment, which seemingly is very different to all the other ones. And we'll go through it and see if we can explain a little bit. Just as by way of introduction, there is a difference between, so how many times was the Aseret HaDibrot given? So it was given at Sinai, but it's brought down twice in the Torah. It's brought down one in this week's parasha, Parashat Yitro. And the second time it's brought down is in Parashat Vayetchanan, where Moshe Rabbeinu in Deuteronomy, in Devarim, actually repeats what happened through the 40 years, and he repeats the Aseret HaDibrot in Parashat Vayetchanan. It's interesting to note that if you analyze the psukim, the verses in Parashat Yitro, in this week's parasha, versus the verses in Parashat Vayetchanan, you'll find some slight nuances, which are kind of, minor differences and may need a little bit of clarification. And I just want to open up today's class with a little bit of the actual psukim, and then we'll go through the finer nuances. So pasuk number 1, Lo tachmod bet re'echa, pasuk in this parasha, source 1, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, Lo tachmod bet re'echa, Lo tachmod eshet re'echa, ve'avdo, ve'amato, ve'shoro, ve'chamoro, v'chol asher re'echa. So the pasuk, chapter 20, pasuk 14, is the final commandment. A person may not covet their neighbor's house, neighbor's wife, male, female, slave, ox, ass, or anything that is in your neighbor, that belongs to your neighbor. Okay, let's quickly fast forward to the pasuk, which is kind of works in tandem in Parashat Vayetchanan. This is Deuteronomy chapter 5, pasuk 18, source number 2 over here. V'lo tachmod eshet re'echa, you should not covet your neighbor's wife. V'lo tit'aveh bet re'echa, and you should not crave your neighbor's house. Sadehu, field, ve'avdo, ve'amato, his servant, maidservant. Shoro v'chamaro, his ox or his ass, v'chol asher l're'echa, or anything that is your neighbor's. Simply put, you have two psukim, two consistent psukim pretty much, where you have the prohibition of actually coveting. Okay, it's just very interesting, just before we start to kind of analyze the actual nuances, it's something very interesting which Ibn Ezra points out. Ibn Ezra kind of brings out a profound psychological insight into the background of this prohibition. And you got over here in source number 3. Anashim rabim yitmahu. Many people are amazed. And they ask the following question. Al zot mitzvah, on this mitzvah. How is it possible for a person not to covet in his heart? All beautiful things that appear desirable to him. It means coveting is really an emotional mitzvah, right? When a person's jealous. By the way, does anyone here have is there a difference? I wasn't sure if there is. Can anyone enlighten me over here? Is there a difference between coveting and jealousy? Envy, jealousy, covet, do all those words intertwine kind of thing, or?
Envy usually is more like covet, I think, and jealousy is when you're worried that someone else is envying something of yours, very technically.
But overall, kind of in terms of
jealousy,
people use them interchangeably.
It's the same sort of emotion, kind of going around, just maybe in a certain nuance in technicalities. You say?
There is a difference, yeah.
Sam, go ahead.
No, there is a nuance between to be jealous of something and
jealous, envious, and coveting.
Right. You can envy. Normally, I think you can envy something, but I think normally you're jealous of someone. Right. I want it because you have it, or it's connected with the holder of that item. Envy is, I think, you can envy it's not. I think the focus. I may be wrong. I think the focus is not so much on the individual. It's really the item you want. Jealousy is, darn it, he's got it. Why can't I?
Okay. All right. All right. But fundamentally, it's the same principle. And that is, there's something very interesting about this mitzvah, or this lo ta'aseh, this specific commandment given, that a person is not an Iron, that a person is not allowed to covet. Now, how can God command us not to covet? Coveting is an emotion, and almost an emotional reaction to what a person has. I feel like I'm jealous of my neighbor's car, my neighbor's house. You know, he's got it. I really wish I could have a car like that.
The thing is, it's like coveting comes from greed. I mean, one can, let's say there are two people. One person, I mean, okay, he's in contact with his neighbor, and he sees his wealth, but it doesn't affect him emotionally. What his neighbor has, he has, and that neighbor is sameach bechelko.
Okay, so you know,
and he doesn't feel any greed towards what his neighbor has.
So Linda, I want you to hang on to that for a few minutes, because I want to get to that subtle difference in a few minutes, and we'll see actually in the pasuk perhaps a certain distinction. Let's hang in there a second. Okay, so Ibn Ezra asks this from a psychological perspective. What is going on? How could God command us not to have this emotion? It's something which a person just has. It's interesting to note that Rav Hirsch actually says this commandment is something which only a divine lawgiver can actually give. Why is that? Because a mortal ruler can only legislate against law and order, murder, theft, that sort of stuff. But God can demand a person to sanctify himself, not only to the level from a practical perspective, but their thoughts, their attitudes, to the point where you can kind of get rid of, purge oneself from any natural tendencies of jealousy or covetousness. So, Ibn Ezra says something fascinating. He says like this: I'll give you a parable. Da ki ish kofrish yesh lo da'at nechona, v'hu ro'eh bat melech shi yafa, lo yachmod ota b'libo shishkav ima, ki da ki ze lo yitachen. He said a peasant, you've got a peasant guy who's an ignorant, poverty-stricken fellow. He is never going to be coveting. So let's say he's going to covet his neighbor's daughter, for argument's sake. What will never go through his mind is to covet the queen or the princess. Why? He said because it's so inaccessible to him that it would never enter his mind. Point is that a person, says Ibn Ezra, from a psychological perspective, a person usually is logical. I know Ron may disagree with that, but the truth is, when you have a certain imagination, a person usually goes within their scope, within their realm of what they're used to. And then they go and they can covet that, they can be jealous of that. Or but something way above, like this poor fellow, to start coveting the princess, it just it doesn't work. Says the Ibn Ezra, that's what's going on over here. God says, you should just know, if you have emunah, if you have true faith, that everything in this world was given for a purpose, that means your neighbor's car or your neighbor's house has no connection to you. It's not within your realm. It's not within your space. And therefore you can be in complete control as not to covet that, like a person would only covet things which are his level. It means ultimately if a person does covet or is jealous, it's really the root of that is a lack of faith, a lack of emunah. It says Ibn Ezra, that's why God commands us, do not covet. Maybe that's connect the beginning and the end of the Aseret HaDibrot. Anochi Adonai Elohecha, asher hotzetich me'et Mitzrayim. Once you've established God is God and God has a divine plan and you have faith in God, then the end and the beginning kind of work together. There's the beginning where God explains who he is and what's the expectation. And then the end, which is the kind of the conclusion where anything which you do will kind of relate to that. And if you understand that God has a certain way of directing the world, then you won't covet something which kind of doesn't belong to you, because everything has a place, everything has a job, everything has a mission. So that's just by way of introduction, a fascinating Ibn Ezra. And I just want to go through a little bit. Sorry? Yeah, so I just want to go through one by one a little bit of understanding between the two psukim, the pasuk in Sefer Shemot, the sixth parasha, Parashat Yitro, and the pasuk in Sefer Dvarim. So maybe let's look it up over here. Let's put it out there for people to make distinctions, and then we'll actually go through one by one. So does anyone have any differences which you can notice in pasuk in Yitro versus the pasuk in Va'etchanan, where it just nuances in the pasuk? Anyone? Go ahead.
Yeah.
Don't be shy.
לא תחמוד בית רעך מזה ולא תחמוד אשת רעך.
Oh, so first distinction, thank you, Dan. We have lo tachmod bet re'echa, do not covet your neighbor's house. The next part of the pasuk is lo tachmod eshet re'echa,
אשת רעך.
covet your neighbor's wife. Okay, so we have that covered in Parshat Yitro, the sixth parasha. In Parshat Va'etchanan, you have the order switched. Lo tachmod eshet re'echa. Lo tachmod eshet re'echa, you should not covet your neighbor's wife first. V'lo tit'aveh bet re'echa, you should not crave your neighbor's house. So you have a simple switch around, which kind of needs a bit of a understanding why it switched. Why Moshe Rabbeinu, when he chose to repeat the commandment, he said it a different way that God actually said it over. Okay, any other distinctions? Any differences between Parshat Yitro and Parshat Va'etchanan in the word in pasuk? Up on the screen, source 1 and 2.
Yeah, the language is different.
Go ahead.
So first of all, they changed the order, right?
Right. So we said the order of Re'acha and Eshet.
Then
Bait and Eshet, yeah.
he added another verb, lotit aveh.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
And what about the sadeh?
Oh, we'll get there in a minute. Very good. Sam, well done. Okay, so Yal's first pointing out that there's another verb over here, velotit aveh. Who can translate?
Last, ta'ava is last.
Yeah.
Okay, is there any difference
Last.
between lo tachmod and lotit aveh?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Aveh is a wish, something you can say, oh, I wish I had it. Tachmod is maybe more aggressive, trying to get something, trying to achieve.
Obstinate.
Lahmod is more ishi, is more personal. That Ave could be in general.
What do you
but-
mean by that?
But it's about a specific thing done,
Ta'ava.
right?
That they're all talking about the same thing, right? But just interesting, there's a different word over here.
I think the tachmod is more cerebral, and the
Yeah.
lust is more emotional. More, it's a driver. It's a driver of behavior. I think Al Tachmod, speaking as a great scholar of the Hebrew language, as you all know, Al Tachmod might be more cerebral. You know,
Yeah, I agree
where's
with.
Shlomo? Where's Shlomo Laniado? Where is he?
I agree with Sam. Sam, you're right.
Okay. Yeah. Anyone else
I
want
knew-
to?
I
want to
knew I
attempt?
liked it. I knew I had a lot of respect for Al.
No, but
Anyone want to attempt a?
but you're right, I'm impressed.
Is it
Actually, yeah,
translation?
Rabbi,
Yeah.
I would say it makes more sense from the Hebrew point of view. לא תתאווה את אשת רעך, מהמילה תאווה. And then לא תחמוד is more of the... See, תחמוד is about financial property.
Do you have a better English word for lo tachmod?
No. Tachmod is covet.
Greed.
And ta'ava is to crave. That's a really big difference in it.
Well, chamdan is greedy, right? Tavtan is...
Different midot, though. Different midot.
Yeah.
One is really cerebral, and one is more of a driver, a driver, right? Do you know what I mean when I say driver?
Yeah.
I think I know what you mean, but I want you to express it.
Well, I'm not talking about driver's license. There's no, yeah. Anyhow, do I need to go further?
We'll see soon. Maybe a finer nuance. That could be what you're saying is what the Rambam says. We have our in-house psychologist over here. Ron, what's your distinction between lo tachmod and lo titaveh? You're muted.
Okay, a mute psychologist. I agree with Sam that the of course I can't comment on the Hebrew differences, but just the English translations of them suggest one that is more emotionally fired, and so it's more asking us not just to not engage in the kind of thinking activity that might lead us to desire what our neighbor has, but also the emotional level. We need to be more engaged in learning to regulate our emotions and to be able to limit their ability to determine our behavior.
So why would you think that in this week's parasha, there is no such distinction? Are you suggesting that lo tachmod is coveting is from a certain level, and then titaveh is craving is from a higher emotional level? Or
I think so. I would say that in a similar way to when it talks about Shabbat with instead of Zachor with Shamor, that it comes after a lot of intervening history of the Jewish nation between the first time that we're given the actual giving of the Aseret HaDibrot and the review of it by Moshe in Sefer Dvarim. And so in between that, there's a whole lot of things where our emotional reactions to reflecting a lack of faith in God and being able to stay with that program perhaps caused Moses to emphasize a different aspect of it. And
so I just want to jump in there for a second. As opposed to Shabbat, where we know Zachor v'Shamor b'dibur echad, that Zachor and Shamor was said in the same breath. Only God can do that, right? And like you correctly emphasized, that that was a very interesting spin, that after 40 years, Moshe Rabbeinu puts an emphasis in a different place. That's a very nice way of putting it. But in Shabbat, we can understand that there was this concept where God says the same thing, but he actually says both. He says Zachor and Shamor. Here,
well, not in the text, though.
No,
I mean,
this is what we know from Malachah Moshe Sinai. The Talmud says Zachor v'Shamor is b'dibur echad ne'emar. It was said together. We say it in Lechalodi every Shabbat, every Friday night. Sure. But when it comes to lo tachmod, it's just a difference in order. It's the same wording, other than the lo titaveh, which seems to be a fine nuance, which we're trying to kind of hammer out now. But let's try and work this out. I just want to point out the distinction between Shabbat and lo tachmod. Yeah?
I think there are two values here that in each of them, but the order is changed. And I think that if you are able to get the wife of your friend, that doesn't mean that you have everything else that he has. You don't possess the sadeh and all this stuff, right? The order in Shemot was, the first priority was don't be greedy or don't be envious of your friend's house, and then his wife and the rest. Suddenly in Dvarim, it becomes the first priority, don't try to get a wife. Because you can get the wife, but it doesn't mean that you get the rest of it. So I think it's a higher value that they're trying to.
That's a very interesting point. In the art scroll in page 970 in the Stone edition, they bring over here instead of right in Bet Hanan, be like what Ron was saying in terms of emphasis, and what you're saying, Eyal, your fellow's house. In Exodus, property is mentioned first. But here, Moses mentioned sensual desire first, because average human behavior have stronger lust for sensual gratification than for additional property. That's an interesting concept. So when Moshe Rabbeinu is relating the Aseret HaDibrot, he's talking about from the people's perspective. That's an interesting thing.
That Tachmod, there's a sense of design. If there's a design other than God being the designer, we have designs on something, right? In other words, it's within our cerebral power to analyze it, take a look at it, understand it, and do something about it. Tava is there's nothing. That's therapy. That's not an intellectual thing, right? Because it's I don't know. I'm getting into
no. That's where we started with Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra said no, because if you have sheer faith, then you will have complete control of your emotions. It's actually fascinating. I've spoken about this before, how the Torah almost has an expectation of us as human beings to be in complete control of our emotions. A person can go to a wedding and have an obligation to be misameach hatam v'kala. And, half an hour before that, he can be at a funeral and cry with the mourner. A person, I had this 2 or 3 years ago, I think I mentioned this once. There was a tragic incident of a woman who passed away on Yom Kippur. And unfortunately, the body was only released for kvura, for interment, for burial, only a couple of days later. But only 4 days between Yom Kippur and Sukkot. And the mourners had the funeral. And then pretty much the next day, they had only a few hours before they had to get up from the Shiva. And Yom Tov breaks the Shiva, so they have to have a shower, change clothes, and do the mitzvah v'samachta b'chagecha. It happens to be one of the hardest mitzvot, of being, joyful on Chag, on Sukkot. And this one of the women turned around to me and says, how am I supposed to do this? First of all, she just said, I feel cheated out of my Shiva. Separate point. But just the mere fact that this roller coaster of emotions, sitting down on the floor in the hardest state of grief and loss, and jump into a state of elation, of joy, which is, how are you supposed to work those two emotions together within an hour? It's something which is an insight on human emotions and what the expectation of godliness is, and exactly how that fits in. Also, it needs a longer discussion. But that's just a point to ponder. Let's just move on a little bit, just to kind of get a little bit of a deeper insight into this, because time is running away from us. So just to run through some of the questions again, we have here's Shemot, it's Parashat Yitro, and this is Parashat Leit Chanan. Here on the screen, note source 4. So we have a couple of questions. First of all, Lo Tachmod, we said, versus Lo Titaveh. Difficult to translate. In English over here, in the Safari, it translates Lo Tachmod, do not covet, Lo Taveh, do not crave. Okay, that's one. The next one is Lo Tachmod is actually mentioned twice in Sefer Shemot. So Lo Tachmod Bet Re'echa, and then it mentions again Lo Tachmod Eshet Re'echa. do not covet the house of your friend. Do not covet your friend's wife. In Sefer Devarim, in Vayetchanan, lo tachmod es re'echa, and then it changes the verb to lo titaveh, do not crave the house of your friend.
Which one which one we follow? Shemot or Devarim?
So this is how it's related to us as Har Sinai, how it was given, and this is how Moshe Rabbeinu relates how it was given.
But which one we follow? Which writing?
They're both. There's not what we follow. They're both in the Torah. They're both in the 5 books of Moses.
They're different.
It's not like one's like the Gemara and one's the pasuk. So we'll go always with the pasuk.
But they're different. They're different.
Oh, so that's what we're trying to figure out. What is the difference, and maybe more importantly, why is there?
Except maybe it's both and not either or. Who says I have to choose? It depends. It's a given circumstance. We had that whole discussion about lying too. Remember that you led so well. And by the way, it's good you did too.
You assume that there's a reason why. It changed.
Oh,
right,
Sam, you're 100% right, and this is what Eyal said. If there is no difference, then why the change? And if there is a difference, you have to understand what's the root cause for that change. So that's maybe what we're trying to do over here. So let's try and continue that. So that was a question.
By the way, I don't mean, I'm saying that it didn't change from this to that. It remains both because it's independent of time, right?
I'm not arguing with that. I agree with you.
I think, Rabbi, maybe it's, hey, I'm on the, I think that the reason maybe in Dvarim it's more practical because when they're in the desert, there's no sadeh, no property and nothing, but there's a wife. And maybe it's based on some kind of issues that were raised when people basically concentrated and focused on the wife of the friend because there was nothing else really there because there was no property.
Except there was no material possessions in the Midbar. But don't forget, this is in Sefer Devarim, it's also happening at the end of the 40 years in the desert. But again, there's no real, property going on. Nobody's got houses in the Midbar, in the desert, right?
I think Tachmod relates to the domesticated, to the private, to the sadeh, and I think the Taveh it relates more to the wild, right? To the Midbar, and I think they're both aspects that are operative in all communities and in individuals as well. I don't find this contradictory. I just don't.
It's definitely not contradictory. I'm just trying to understand the subtleties of differences.
Okay.
I think it's an interesting point actually you raised. So again, Lo Tachmod versus Lo Titaveh. You have Lo Tachmod and you have Lo Titaveh. Change of words. Lo Tachmod.
Can I give a try?
Sure, go ahead, Mar.
So, and I could be totally off here, but I always understood. Sam, I gave you a little break to come in there. I knew you'd come in.
You gave an opening there.
I feel a sense of responsibility, Meyer. I mean,
right.
We appreciate it, Sam.
Yeah. To me, covet is it's not only about yourself. It's about looking at the other person and saying, you know what? He or she does not deserve this. I do. So it's not only about yourself. Like when you crave something, you're craving it for yourself. Right? But when you're coveting, it's not only about you, it's about the person who actually has it.
Meyer, I think you've given really the distinction between jealousy and envy.
Well, I'm seeing it in this content. So I'm thinking originally, Tachmod, like the first one is the house. So the commandments are don't, if your neighbor has all these things, don't look at him and say, you know what? He shouldn't have these things. He doesn't really deserve these things. I do. And later on, it's reversed. And I'm guessing here, because Tachmod. So you don't say that about the person's wife, but you can't say that about a house because a house you could crave. No, I lost it. I don't know.
I like the distinction, but it needs to fit into why it got changed around from Bayit to Eshet over on this side, and here to Eshet Bayit. So it's housewife and house. That's a bit of a Okay. So let's Just going back to our list of
But
questions.
I think there is an explanation there. I think, I think that as we evolved as a collection of individuals into a community, an individual can deal with design, I think, more. I mean, what the question is, once you're a community, how do you deal with those? How do you deal with the less of an individual in a community? The whole idea of a community is we're together. Before we were a community, or when we were less of a community but more individuals, then we had more control, which is what Talmud is about.
Or perhaps it's the breakdown of society when individuals act like that.
Okay.
I have one more thing I could just mention. It just occurred to me that there's a tradition, I'm not sure where it comes from, but to look at the first 5 of the Dibrot and then line them up with the second 5.
Right.
So you look for a correspondence between 1 and 6 and 2, and they're like don't murder, for example, lines up with I am God. Only God determines who lives and who dies, not you. And when we do that, we line up 5 with 10. So so the emphasis, if you're looking in the first giving in Sefer, in our current Parsha in Yitro, then there's the emphasis is on the house first, and you grew up in a house with your parents, and there's a kind of honoring your parents, their relationship. Your parents have a unique relationship as well. You have that same kind of relationship in your own house, so you don't go after your neighbor's house or his wife or things like that. There's a certain kind of correspondence there. There's another tradition that I think comes from applying a principle from Sefer Yetzirah.
One second, hold on a second, Ron. I'm just going to jump in 1 second what you said.
Sure.
Because you're stretching the concept of bayit, which is, a beautiful idea. First of all, the Mechilta does talk about the connection between the 5th and the 10th.
Yeah.
And he says, Mechilta says that a covetous person will have children who dishonor him. You're so busy being jealous about everybody else, you're going to be selfish. You're going to put yourself before your children. Ultimately, your children won't honor you. But that's a beautiful idea. But the concept of bayit, in the way you explained it so beautifully, is the bayit means the home and the makeup of the family. And when you're going to covet somebody else's, that is inappropriate in this context, as opposed to maybe the more simple, literal meaning of betre echaz, the actual physical structure of the house. But I suppose it's not only, it's also. So
there's also the male and the female aspects too. The house is where the woman is in charge. I mean, the woman, that's the transmission of culture, right? That's where the transmission of culture has the going outside of the house. If you get a male German Shepherd or a female German Shepherd, the female hangs around the house, right? The male goes out.
Yeah, but what's that got to do with coveting, though? Okay, go ahead.
Because I think that's more of an aggressive, more of a male thing. I mean, I'm stretching it a little bit.
I don't know if that's true. Okay.
But what I'm really struck by, for me, what was important there is that the house is the domain. I mean, that's where the transmission of culture happens, and that's the woman's domain, no matter what we think.
Right. And Ron, the other idea of Sefer Yetzirah, sorry.
Yeah. So the other way is to look at it as the end is in the beginning, and the beginning is in the end. So something that's in 1 should also be reflected in number 10. And so there's that uniqueness of God in 1, and I am God. And then in number 10, we have that emphasis again on not coveting, is kind of a similar. Psychologically, they're both based on emotion. Knowing God is not something that we do through thought or analysis. It's something that is an emotional acceptance of God, just like coveting is emotionally driven. And we need to be able to do that. And we're functioning psychologically in our emotional domain in both 1 and 10. Whereas as we move from 1 down to 5, we move from emotion into behavior and thought, and then behavior. Speech is reflective of thought, in not saying the name of God in vain. Then we move to several behavioral ones. We come back to speech again in number 9, where we don't bear false witness, which is done through speech. And then we come out into emotion again in number 10. Now that's my own idea on that, but
I remember talking to you about this once.
Maybe
to fine tune it. I don't think, and I could be wrong, but I don't think it's the way you said it was that the emunah in Hashem, for example, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, is an emotional thing. It's not maybe only a cognitive perspective. It's also an emotional perspective, as opposed to being only an emotional perspective. A person has to have idiyah in his a cognitive understanding, as well as an emotional.
Do you mean for number 1?
For number 1.
Yeah, I said that was emotion.
But not only emotions, I'm saying.
Well, of course, everything is more than just, everything involves all of us, but I'm thinking of where the emphasis is.
Right, yeah. No, just because it's such fundamentals, I wanted to.
We want our children very young to have a concept of God before they can think it through. Mm-hmm. We want that to be part of their identity.
Right, exactly. All right, we've had some very powerful ideas over here, and I think this alone, as we say in Haggadah Dayenu, we've got 10 minutes, and I want to just kind of break down a little bit more what we've spoken about, and maybe end off with a fascinating Gemara. So, Lo Tachmod, we said this twice. We said also Lo Tachmod Betre Echa. Sam didn't mention. Sam mentioned also over here it says Sadehu in Vayet Hanan, and over here in this week's parasha it doesn't mention Sadehu. It's interesting. There is a very interesting distinction between the two, and it does require a bit of an understanding. But maybe just to break down, not be able to answer all the questions, but one difference between Lo Tachmod and Lo Titaveh. We asked, what is the distinction? Seemingly there's difference in wording. So what is the difference? So there seems to be a world machloket between the great Rishonim. And we started with Maimonides. Rambam says as follows. Rambam, very interestingly enough, actually in his Sefer HaMitzvot, so Rambam wrote the 613 mitzvot, like some other great rabbis put together, is what exactly the 613 mitzvot are. And, many questions and many fundamentals come through the Rambam in the way he classified and put the mitzvot in different ways and different formats to something like the Sefer Mitzvot HaGadol. Other great rabbis, Ramban kind of goes to town on many of the things Rambam writes in terms of breakdown of mitzvot. But Rambam actually, when he talks about this commandment, he breaks down this commandment into 2 separate negative commandments. So mitzvah taseh, lo taseh, resh samechei, negative commandment 265, he says as follows: Hizharnu mehasin machshavtenu la'asot tachbula k'dei liknot ma shebershut zolatenu ma'achenu v'hu amru lo tachmod betrecha. The way Rambam translates this is he prohibited us from putting our thoughts to fabricating some sort of plan in order to acquire that which is in the possession of our other brothers. So that means you're trying to formulate a plan. How can I possibly get to a stage of acquiring? It's almost like an action-based problem. That's what he says, V'hu amro lo tachmod betrecha. When we say lo tachmod, it's referring to a actionable plan to actually get to carrying out this coveting thing. So you want to get this guy's car. You're really jealous of this guy's car. So you're formulating a plan how to do it. So you offer him, you coax him into selling it to you. You pressure him. Sorry?
Design.
By design. There's the whole concept of high pressurized negotiations. High pressure negotiations is a form of lo tachmod. according to Rambam, right? Then he says, there's another separate love, a separate mitzvah, negative commandment 266. Izharnu me'asim machshavtenu lachmod ma sheyesh la'achinu u'itavot bo shezeh yeh mavol asot tachpula liknoto. This is a whole different league, and that is even the desire to actually want to covet. Rambam says, "Ve'en shnei lavim elu b'inyan echad." These two are not the same. Our lav rishon, the first one is lo tachmod, hu lo tachmod, mazhir liknot ma sheyesh lizratenu. So you can't have an action plan on how you're going to act upon your covet. V'lav sheni mazhir afil litavot beliben levad. The second part of lo titaveh, which is don't even get to a stage where you will have this emotion. Make sure you don't even desire it in the first place.
Ta'ava is lust.
Lust.
This is
Don't
lust.
have that craving. Don't have that lust.
Craving.
And that was that Ibn Ezra, which we spoke about at the beginning. How could God actually expect such a thing, not even to get to that stage of not even wanting to have a desire? Okay.
Well, Rabbi, excuse me if I can.
Sure.
I think in view of this, and when there was the issue with the Bnot Tzlofchad, that the Bnei Israel, they could have argued with Moses that they get the Nachala of Tzlofchad instead of their daughters, but instead they supported them. So this shows clear lo tachmod, and they were very, gentlemanly, and they really adhere to the mitzvah shel lo tachmod.
The opposite of lo tachmod, you mean? Right.
The opposite, yeah.
Right. Okay. Very nice. Nice idea. So I just want to point out that we've got in the last 4 minutes that we have is that Rashi. The class is titled "What's Bothering Rashi?" So, what's Rashi's approach? It's interesting. Rashi doesn't say a word in the sixth parasha. Rashi also, in the distinction in Parashat Vayetchanan between Lo Tachmod and Lo Titaveh, Rashi actually does not make a distinction. So, unlike Rambam, who classifies these two as separate negative commandments, don't even desire it in your heart, and definitely don't make an action plan to actually get it, which is a very practical difference because you could do one without the other. But Rashi says, Rashi uses the Targum, the Onkelos, the Targum Onkelos, who says, Lo tirog, which is another expression of desiring. Fascinating. Rashi kind of points out that there's a pasuk in Bereshit, which we're all very familiar of. The pasuk referring to Chava, when she's noticing the whatever fruit it was on the tree, the geffen, the chita, apple is a Christian concept, but the whatever fruit it was on the Etz Hadat, when the woman saw that the tree was good for eating, v'chi ta'ava hula einayim, and a delight to the eyes, and the same word v'nechmad ha'etz la'askil, lo tachmod, nechmad, ta'ava, lo titaveh. The tree was desirable as a source of wisdom. She took its fruit, ate it, and she gave some to her husband. So we see Rashi kind of says these two words are interchangeable, and they don't have much meaning in terms of real practical differences. So that's Rashi's approach. I wonder how the Rambam would kind of break this down. Although anybody who's into linguistics will surely tell you we don't just repeat, especially in the Torah, wording which just means the same thing. Every word in the Torah is written, by divine order. Clearly, there must be some sort of difference, but Rashi doesn't make that distinction based on our parasha of Lo Tachmod and Lo Titaveh.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Without any explanation.
Sam, can we take questions in 2 minutes just because we are
Oh, sure. Go ahead. I don't even have to do it, really.
Well, in 2 minutes. We'll just finish. I just want to mention one Gemara. And in the interest of time.
Go ahead.
So just want to mention Rambam, by the way. Rambam says, Hata'ava mevi'al de chimud, va'chimud mevi'al de gezel. You should just know, this is a slippery slope, the way the Rambam says it. It starts off with a desire. Here, whatever you want to have it. And then that desire can cause a person to coax the person, offer them a lot of money, whatever it is, to be able to get the item. And if the person will not be happy to give it, what's going to end up, he's actually maybe even going to end up stealing it as a result. Rashi Ram says, famous story with Achav in Tanakh, where his wife Izebel kindly murdered Navot when Achav wanted to get the orchard, which was next to his palace. So Izebel promptly got rid of him by bringing some false witnesses, and ultimately Achav happily gets his orchard next to his palace. Just want to kind of break down. So just in terms of breakdown, that's what it is. One can lead to the next. The Gemara in Gittin, I just want to bring this Gemara because just so, and then we'll finish. So you should allow me another 2 extra minutes, if I may. Fascinating Gemara in Gittin. The Gemara in Gittin talks about the different things which cause the destruction of the temple. And there's many, many different things which the Gemara talks about. What the cause was, most famously, the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, which we speak about every Tisha B'Av. But the Gemara says as follows, maybe not such a well-known Gemara. Pasuk. There was a story of a certain fellow who set his eyes on the wife of his master. Ushavalye the Nagre Hava, and he was some sort of a carpenter's apprentice. Pamachat. Once upon a time, this master needed to borrow some money. So his apprentice said to him, send your wife and I'll lend you. He obviously had some wicked, cruel plans. He sent his wife. He stayed with her for 3 days. Now this guy is waiting 3 days. There's no WhatsApp. Where are you? So he goes to the apprentice and says, no, what's going on? Do you know where my wife is? Where's my wife? I sent it to you. Listen, I send away. I send it back straight away. And I heard so I heard that she was abused and raped on the way. He said, what should I do? Listen, if you listen to me, I'll give you good advice. Go get rid of her, divorce her. Listen, it's expensive, it's a costly deal, this one. Don't worry, I will lend you money and you pay her out. So he goes and divorces her. So he goes and gets married to her. What happened? The time came and the guy didn't have money to pay up. So he comes to so he comes to this guy, the apprentice. He said, come, you know what? You can't repay, so come and work off your debt with me. So the apprentice is sitting with this guy's wife, while this guy, he is serving them, he's the waiter, and he's seeing how his wife is with this guy and how this whole thing, and he's paying him for this whole crazy act. And his tears would drop down from his eyes and fall into the cups. And that the Gemara says, on that time, the sentence of the Bet HaMikdash was going to be destroyed happened. But there's one line where the Gemara starts off with, Maaseh be'adam echad shnatan enav be'eshet rabo. It started when the person put his eyes on his master's wife. Coming back to our point, one thing can lead to the next. And in fact, if you want to put it in a different way, that the Aseret HaDibrot go with Anochi Hashem Elokecha starts off with, and it's got all these intermediary different prohibitions or different commandments, and they're all to say kind of the end game. You know what the end game is? Watch it. Watch how you feel.
Slippery slope.
Watch how your emotion goes, because it's a slippery slope. And all those things can happen. Like by Achav, the person got murdered, there was jealousy, everything happened. Like this story, he literally killed the person, right? He stole his wife, and everything goes pear-shaped. It's such an important concept, as the Mishnah said in Avot. Rebbe Kapar Omer, Hakin'ah, Hatava, V'Hakavod, envy, lust, and desire, Motzi'in and honor, desire and honor, Motzi'in et ha'adam min ha'olam, literally puts a man out of the world, takes a man out of this world. The person is not able to control themselves emotionally. The importance of being on top of things. God gives us the 10 Commandments, which is the fundamentals of Kol HaTorah Kula. We should tell you, make sure you know how to handle this, because if you don't, this is a slippery slope.
This is the Ramchal's chapter on Zehirut, Srichut.
Right, that's how the breakdown, and so on. So it's the other way around as well. Obviously, when you start Kedusha, it leads you to greater places. Okay, we'll stop there. Thank you
in the Shema. I mean, in the Shema, ולא תטורו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם, שאתם זונים אחריהם.
It starts, it's Lev Chomed, Ein Roeh Lev Chomed. Yeah, that's another thing.
חזק וברוך.
חזק וברוך, everyone.
תודה רבה.